The cold wind swept down Main Street in Yuba City, California, carrying with it the scent of rain and Victoria Ellery's dashed hopes. She stood on the steps of the tax assessor's office, clutching the notice that would change her life forever, her fingers trembling as they crumpled the edges of the official paper. It was 1876, and the world seemed determined to take everything from her father, then her mother, and now the land that had been in her family since the first gold rush of '49. Victoria's chestnut hair whipped across her face as she stared at the impossible figure on the notice. $300 in back taxes. Might as well have been $3,000 for all the money she had. The drought had killed half her crops last season, and what little she had managed to harvest barely kept food on the table through winter. Miss Ellery. The tax assessor, Mr. Finch, had followed her outside, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose like curious insects. "I'm afraid we cannot extend the deadline any further. The county needs its revenue, you understand. If payment isn't received by the end of the month, the property will be auctioned." Victoria straightened her spine, refusing to let this small man see her break. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. She tucked the notice into her pocket and walked toward her wagon, her boots kicking up dust with each determined step. She had just untied her horse from the hitching post when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn. A tall figure on horseback was coming down the street, a man whose broad shoulders and straight posture marked him immediately as someone comfortable with hard work and long days in the saddle. As he drew closer, Victoria recognized Wade Calloway, owner of the Double C ranch that bordered her property to the east. She had seen him in town occasionally, exchanged pleasantries at church socials, but they were hardly more than acquaintances. Still, there was something in his deep blue eyes that always made her feel as though he could see right through her carefully constructed facade of strength. Wade tipped his hat as he drew his horse to a stop beside her wagon. "Afternoon, Miss Ellery. Seems like rain's coming." Victoria nodded, glancing at the darkening clouds. "Mr. Calloway, yes, I hope it holds off until I get home." She attempted a smile, but it felt brittle on her face. Wade studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful beneath the shadow of his hat brim. "Everything all right?" "You seem troubled." "It's nothing I can't handle," she replied automatically, the lie bitter on her tongue. "Well, if there's anything you need." He left the offer hanging in the air between them. Victoria hesitated, pride warring with desperation. But what good was pride if she lost everything? "Actually, Mr. Calloway, I wonder if you might know of any work available. I find myself in need of additional income." Something shifted in Wade's expression, concern, perhaps, or curiosity. "What kind of work were you thinking?" Before she could answer, the tax notice slipped from her pocket as she climbed onto her wagon seat, fluttering to the ground. Wade dismounted in one fluid motion and retrieved it, his eyes inevitably catching the bold red print and the substantial sum due. "I see," he said quietly, handing it back to her. Victoria snatched it, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Like I said, it's nothing I can't handle." Wade leaned against her wagon, his gaze direct and uncompromising. "Miss Ellery, Victoria, my father always said there's no shame in needing help, only in being too proud to accept it when offered." She gripped the reins tighter. "That's very kind, but I'm not offering charity," Wade interrupted. "I'm offering a solution." He gestured toward the open country beyond the town limits. "I've got more land than I can manage properly, especially with 3 of my hands moving on to Oregon next week. Your place borders mine. If you can't pay the taxes on your land—" He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "Then we'll share mine." Victoria stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I don't understand. It's simple. You keep your house, your garden plot. The rest we work together. Split the profits, split the taxes. You'd have income, I'd have help." He shrugged as if it were the most natural arrangement in the world. "It's just good business." But Victoria saw something else in his eyes, something that suggested this wasn't just about business. She had seen the way he looked at her sometimes during town socials when he thought she wouldn't notice. "Mr. Calloway, Wade. If we're going to be partners, you should call me Wade." "Wade," she said, testing the name. "This is very sudden. I need time to think." He nodded, stepping back from her wagon. "Of course, but time's something you're short on, according to that notice." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "Here's my proposal written out plain. Take it home, read it over. I'll call on you tomorrow afternoon for your answer." Victoria took the paper, surprised by his preparation. "You had this ready? How did you know about my situation?" Wade's expression softened. "Small town. Word gets around, and I've been looking for a reason to talk to you properly for some time now." Before Victoria could respond to that unexpected admission, thunder rumbled overhead. Wade glanced at the sky, then back at her. "Best get home before the downpour. Tomorrow, then?" Victoria nodded, suddenly unable to find words. As Wade mounted his horse and rode away, she unfolded the paper in her hands, skimming its contents. The terms were fair, more than fair, and if it worked, she might not only save her land but improve it. Rain began to fall as Victoria drove her wagon out of town, each drop seeming to echo the rapid beating of her heart. She wasn't sure if it was fear or hope causing the fluttering in her chest, but for the first time in months, she felt something besides despair when she thought about the future. The Ellery homestead looked particularly forlorn in the gathering dusk as Victoria pulled her wagon up to the small barn. The whitewash on the house was peeling, the fence around the garden listing in places. Her father would have been heartbroken to see it in such a state, but after his passing 3 years ago and her mother's last winter, Victoria had been fighting a losing battle against time, weather, and her own limited strength. She unhitched her horse and led it into the barn, going through the familiar motions of removing the harness and brushing down the animal while her mind churned with possibilities. Wade's offer was unexpected, generous even, but Victoria wasn't naive. Men didn't make such offers without expecting something in return. Yet there had been no suggestion of impropriety in his manner or his written proposal. It was, as he had said, a business arrangement. But could she trust him? More importantly, could she trust herself to maintain a purely professional relationship with a man whose mere presence made her uncomfortably aware of how long it had been since she'd felt like a woman rather than just a struggling farmer? After tending to the horse and securing the barn against the intensifying storm, Victoria ran through the rain to her house. Inside, she lit a lamp and sank into her father's old chair at the kitchen table, spreading Wade's proposal before her. The terms were straightforward. They would combine their efforts on both properties, with Wade providing additional hired help as needed. Profits would be divided equally after expenses, including taxes. Victoria would retain full ownership of her land, and Wade of his. Either party could terminate the arrangement with 30 days' notice, provided all financial obligations were current. It was, in essence, exactly what Wade had described: a partnership of convenience that would benefit them both. Victoria stared at his bold signature at the bottom of the page, tracing the strong lines with her fingertip. Wade Calloway was well respected in Yuba City. His father had been one of the earliest settlers in the area, establishing the Double C Ranch when California was still Mexican territory. After the senior Calloway's death 5 years ago, Wade had not only maintained the ranch but expanded it, proving himself a skilled cattleman and businessman. He was also, Victoria had to admit, an undeniably handsome man. Tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of the summer sky and a smile that transformed his usually serious expression into something that made women throughout the county sigh wistfully. Victoria had noticed him. Of course, would have to be blind not to, but had always kept her distance, especially after her parents' deaths left her to manage the farm alone. She'd had no time for the distractions of courtship, even if any man had been interested in a woman whose hands were calloused and whose dresses were mended more times than she could count. And yet, Wade had sought her out, had prepared this proposal in advance, suggesting he had given it considerable thought. Victoria rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building behind her eyes. There was really no choice, was there? It was this or lose everything her parents had worked for, everything she had worked for. The rain drummed steadily on the roof as Victoria prepared a simple supper of bread and stew. As she ate, she continued to weigh her options, such as they were. She could refuse Wade's offer and try to find work in town, but the wages she could earn as a seamstress or shop girl wouldn't cover the taxes and still allow her to maintain the farm. She could sell a portion of her land, but who would buy it with the drought making farming so uncertain? And how would she survive on a smaller parcel when she could barely make ends meet now? No, Wade's offer was her best hope, perhaps her only hope. After washing her dishes, Victoria took the lamp and moved to the small bedroom that had once been her parents'. She had moved into it after her mother's death, finding some comfort in being surrounded by their belongings, by the faint scent of her mother's lavender sachets that still lingered in the dresser drawers. She changed into her nightgown and sat on the edge of the bed, brushing her long hair with methodical strokes. Tomorrow, Wade would come for her answer. Tomorrow, she would agree to his proposal because what choice did she have? But as she extinguished the lamp and slipped beneath the quilt her mother had made for her 16th birthday, Victoria made a silent vow. This would be a business arrangement only. She would not allow herself to become dependent on Wade Calloway in any way beyond the terms of their agreement. And she would certainly not allow herself to develop feelings for him, regardless of how kind his eyes were or how his smile made her heart skip a beat. This was about survival, not romance, and Victoria Ellery was determined to survive. Morning arrived with clear skies and the fresh, washed feeling that follows a good rain. Victoria rose early, as was her habit, and went about her chores with focused efficiency. She fed the chickens, collected eggs, milked her cow, and then returned to the house to prepare breakfast. As she ate, she mentally prepared for Wade's visit, rehearsing what she would say, how she would maintain a businesslike demeanor despite the unusual nature of their arrangement. After breakfast, she changed out of her work clothes into a simple blue dress that had once been her Sunday best, but had since been demoted to receiving visitors status. She swept the floor, dusted the sparse furniture, and even picked a few early wildflowers to place in a jar on the table, not for Wade's benefit, she told herself, but because the house needed a touch of color. By early afternoon, Victoria's nerves were drawn tight as fiddle strings. She had read through Wade's proposal 3 more times, finding no hidden catches or concerns. It was, by all appearances, exactly what he had represented it to be. Yet still she paced, alternating between the kitchen and the small front porch, scanning the road for any sign of an approaching rider. When Wade finally appeared, riding up the dusty path to her house at precisely 2 o'clock, Victoria had to take a deep breath to steady herself before stepping out onto the porch to greet him. He looked even more imposing in the bright sunlight than he had in town, his broad shoulders and strong jawline giving him a rugged handsomeness that Victoria tried hard to ignore. He dismounted with easy grace, tying his horse to the porch railing before removing his hat as he approached. "Afternoon, Victoria," he said, and the sound of her name in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "I hope I'm not too early." "Not at all," she replied, gesturing toward the house. "Would you care to come in? I've made coffee." Wade followed her inside, ducking slightly to pass through the doorway. Victoria was suddenly, acutely aware of how small her home was, how modest compared to what she imagined the Double C ranch house must be like. "Please, sit down," she said, motioning to the table while she poured coffee into 2 cups that thankfully matched. Wade sat, but left his hat on his knee rather than placing it on the table, a small courtesy that Victoria's father would have approved of. She set a cup before him and took the seat opposite, her hands wrapped around her own cup, more for something to hold on to than from any desire for coffee. "I've read your proposal," she said, getting straight to the point. "The terms seem fair." Wade nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "I tried to make it equitable for both of us. Have you reached a decision?" Victoria met his gaze directly. "I have. I accept your offer with one condition." His eyebrows rose slightly. "What's that?" "I want it clearly understood that this is a business arrangement only. I won't be beholden to you beyond the terms we've agreed to." A smile tugged at the corner of Wade's mouth. "Of course, I wouldn't expect otherwise." He paused, studying her. "May I ask what you're concerned about specifically?" Victoria felt her cheeks warm under his scrutiny. "Nothing specific. I just want to ensure we both understand the nature of our partnership." "I understand completely," Wade said, his voice reassuring. "This is about helping each other through difficult times, nothing more." Victoria nodded, relief washing through her. "Then we have an agreement." Wade pulled a second copy of the proposal from his pocket, along with a small inkwell and pen. "I brought this in case you agreed. If you'll sign here, we can make it official." Victoria took the pen, dipping it into the ink with steady hands. She signed her name beneath Wade's on both copies, feeling as though she were signing away some part of herself even as she knew she was securing her future. Wade blew gently on the ink to dry it, then folded one copy and handed it to her, tucking the other into his pocket. "There, partners." He extended his hand across the table. Victoria hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip firm but not crushing. A working man's hand, strong yet careful. "Partners," she echoed, withdrawing her hand perhaps more quickly than politeness dictated. "When do we start?" "No time like the present," Wade said, finishing his coffee. "If you're willing, I'd like to ride the boundary between our properties today, get a sense of what we're working with." Victoria nodded, standing. "I'll just change into something more suitable for riding." While she changed into her work dress and boots, Victoria heard Wade moving about outside. When she emerged, she found him examining her small barn with a critical eye. "Your roof's going to need patching before next winter," he observed as she approached. "And that north wall is starting to bow." Victoria sighed. "I know. It's on my list, but there never seems to be enough time or money." Wade turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "Well, now you've got help. We'll add it to our joint projects." He gestured toward the horse she kept for riding rather than pulling the wagon. "Shall we?" They saddled their horses and set out, riding east toward the boundary line between their properties. The land was still damp from yesterday's rain, wildflowers dotting the fields with splashes of color. Despite her concerns about their arrangement, Victoria couldn't help but feel a sense of hope as they rode side by side. Wade pointed out features of the landscape, discussing potential improvements with a knowledge that impressed her. He spoke of water management, crop rotation, the possibility of expanding her modest herd of cattle to join with his larger one. The creek that runs through your southeast corner connects to the one on my property, he explained as they paused on a small rise overlooking the land. If we divert it slightly here and here, he pointed, we could irrigate both fields more efficiently during dry spells. Victoria listened, asking questions and offering her own insights. For all his success, Wade didn't dismiss her ideas or talk down to her as many men might have. He treated her as a true partner, valuing her knowledge of her own land. As the afternoon wore on, Victoria found herself relaxing in Wade's company, even enjoying it. He had a dry sense of humor that surprised her, and a depth of knowledge about farming and ranching that went beyond what she had expected. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky when they finally turned back toward her house. They had covered most of the boundary and developed a rough plan for the coming weeks. Wade would bring 2 of his hands over the next day to begin repairs on her barn, while Victoria would ride to his ranch to assess his current crops and suggest improvements. I think this partnership is going to work out just fine, Wade said as they approached her house. You know your land better than anyone, and you're not afraid to speak your mind. Victoria smiled, the first genuine smile she'd managed in his presence. And you're not offended when I do. That's a rare quality in a man, Wade chuckled. My mother didn't raise a fool. Only a fool ignores good sense just because it comes from a woman. They dismounted by the porch, and Victoria was suddenly unsure of the proper protocol. Should she invite him to stay for supper? That seemed too intimate for their first day as business partners. Wade solved her dilemma by declining before she could offer. I should get back. Got cattle to check on before dark. He hesitated, then added, but I'll be by tomorrow with my men to start on that barn. Around 8 if that suits you. 8 is fine, Victoria agreed, relieved yet oddly disappointed that he was leaving. Thank you, Wade, for everything. He settled his hat more firmly on his head, his blue eyes warm as they met hers. No need for thanks between partners. We're in this together now. As she watched him ride away, Victoria felt a curious mixture of anxiety and anticipation. She had entered into this arrangement out of necessity, yet she couldn't deny that something about Wade Calloway intrigued her. His competence, his respect for her, the way he saw her land not as a burden, but as an opportunity, all of it was refreshingly different from the pity or dismissal she usually encountered. Victoria turned back to her house, which suddenly didn't seem quite so forlorn. Tomorrow would bring changes, challenges, and the strange new experience of not facing them alone. For the first time since receiving the tax notice, Victoria allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, things might turn out all right after all. True to his word, Wade arrived promptly at 8 the next morning, accompanied by 2 ranch hands introduced as Hank and Jasper. Victoria had been up since dawn, preparing a hearty breakfast for herself and her unexpected work crew. It felt odd having men around the place again, their deep voices and heavy boots a sharp contrast to the solitude she had grown accustomed to. You didn't need to feed us, Wade protested when she invited them in, though the appreciative looks from Hank and Jasper suggested they had no such objections. It's the least I can do, Victoria replied, setting plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits before them. Besides, men work better on full stomachs. My father always said so. Wade's eyes crinkled with amusement. Your father was a wise man. He sat down at the table, removing his hat with a nod of thanks. Breakfast was a surprisingly comfortable affair. Hank, a weathered man in his 40s with a perpetual squint, and Jasper, younger and more talkative with a shock of red hair, shared stories of life on the double C that had Victoria laughing despite herself. Wade mostly listened, offering an occasional dry comment that invariably set the others off again. After breakfast, the men set to work on the barn while Victoria prepared to ride to the double C as planned. Wade provided detailed directions and assured her that his foreman, Ellery, would show her around. "I'd take you myself," he said as he walked her to her horse, "but I promise to get this barn secured before any more weather moves in." Victoria mounted her horse, adjusting her skirts over the side saddle. "I'm perfectly capable of finding my way, Mr. Calloway." His mouth quirked at her formal address. "Back to Mr. Calloway, are we? I thought we were past that." Victoria felt her cheeks warm. Force of habit, Wade. His name felt intimate on her lips, and the way his expression softened when she said it made something flutter in her chest. "That's better," he said. "Ellery knows you're coming. He'll answer any questions you have. I should be along by mid-afternoon." Victoria nodded and turned her horse toward the east, feeling Wade's eyes on her back as she rode away. The Double C Ranch was about 3 miles from her property, and the ride gave her time to think about the strange turn her life had taken in just 2 days. The Double C was impressive even from a distance. The main house was a substantial 2-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Several outbuildings formed a rough square behind it, including a large barn, bunkhouse, smithy, and what looked like a smokehouse. Fields of corn and wheat stretched to the south, while cattle grazed in fenced pastures to the north. As Victoria approached, a tall, lean man emerged from the barn, raising a hand in greeting. He was older than Wade, with iron-gray hair and a weathered face that suggested years of outdoor work. "Miss Ellery," he called as she drew closer. "I'm Ellery Fletcher, foreman of this outfit. Wade said you'd be coming by." Victoria dismounted, taking the hand he offered. "Please call me Victoria. Wade asked me to take a look at your crops, see if there are ways we might improve yields." Ellery's expression was openly curious, but he merely nodded. "Wade explained your arrangement. It's a good idea if you ask me. He's been working too hard since his father passed, trying to manage everything himself." This was a perspective Victoria hadn't considered, that Wade might benefit from their partnership beyond the purely practical aspects. "I hadn't realized," she said carefully. Ellery shrugged. "Wade's not one to complain, but a man needs more than just work to fill his days." He gestured toward the fields. "Shall we?" The next few hours were educational for both Victoria and Ellery. She saw immediately that while the Double C livestock operation was exemplary, the crop management could use improvement. The soil was being depleted by continuous planting of the same crops, and water usage wasn't as efficient as it could be. Ellery listened to her suggestions with respect, occasionally making notes in a small leather book he carried. "Wade said you knew your business, and he wasn't wrong," he commented as they walked back toward the house. "Your father was Samuel Ellery, wasn't he? Used to bring in the best wheat yields in the county." Victoria nodded, pleased that her father's reputation had endured. "He taught me everything I know about farming. He believed a woman should understand how to manage land just as well as any man." "Smart man," Ellery said approvingly. "Too many fathers don't teach their daughters anything useful, then wonder why they struggle when left on their own." By the time they reached the main house, Victoria was hungry and more than ready to rest her feet. Ellery introduced her to Mrs. Potts, the housekeeper who managed the domestic side of the ranch, a plump, cheerful woman who immediately insisted Victoria join her for lunch. "Heavens, child, you're thin as a rail," Mrs. Potts clucked, setting a plate of stew and fresh bread before Victoria in the spacious kitchen. Working a farm by yourself, I'm not surprised. It's good Wade's stepping in to help. That boy's got a good head on his shoulders, just like his father. Victoria wasn't sure how to respond to the assumption that she needed rescuing, but the food smelled delicious, and she was too hungry to argue. Wade's been very kind, she said diplomatically. Mrs. Potts smiled knowingly. Kind, yes. And if you don't mind my saying so, it's about time he took an interest in something besides this ranch. A man his age should have a family by now. Victoria nearly choked on her stew. Oh no, it's not like that. We're business partners, nothing more, Mrs. Potts raised an eyebrow but didn't contradict her. If you say so, dear. Now eat up. There's apple pie for dessert. After lunch, Ellery showed Victoria the cattle operation, explaining Wade's breeding program and plans for expanding the herd. It was clear that while the crops might need work, the livestock side of the Double C was thriving under Wade's management. They were inspecting a new calf when the sound of approaching hoofbeats announced Wade's arrival. Victoria turned to see him riding toward them, his hat pushed back on his head and his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms. "How's the barn coming along?" Victoria called as he dismounted. "The roof's patched and the walls reinforced," Wade replied. "Hank and Jasper are finishing up the last of it." He looked to Ellery. "Everything going all right here," Ellery nodded, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "Miss Ellery's been educating me on proper crop rotation and soil management. Seems we've been doing it all wrong for years." Wade glanced at Victoria, who felt suddenly self-conscious. "I didn't say that exactly, no need to soften it," Wade interrupted, his expression serious though his eyes were warm. "If there are improvements to be made, I want to hear about them. That's the whole point of this partnership." Victoria relaxed slightly. "Well, in that case, yes. Your soil needs help and your irrigation system is wasteful, but your cattle operation is impressive." Wade's mouth curved into a smile. "High praise indeed. Why don't we go up to the house and you can tell me exactly what needs changing?" They spent the next hour in Wade's study, a comfortable room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk covered in papers. Victoria outlined her suggestions, using a map of the property to indicate where changes should be made. Wade listened attentively, asking questions that showed he was taking her ideas seriously. As the afternoon wore on, Victoria found herself increasingly comfortable in his presence, her initial wariness gradually giving way to genuine respect for his knowledge and willingness to consider new approaches. "I think we can implement most of these changes before planting season," Wade said finally, leaning back in his chair. "It'll mean additional labor, but the long-term benefits are worth it." Victoria nodded, pleased that he saw the value in her suggestions. "My father always said farming is about planning for next year, not just this one." "Wise words," Wade agreed. He glanced out the window where the sun was beginning to lower in the sky. "It's getting late. You should stay for supper before heading back." Victoria hesitated. "I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition. Besides, Mrs. Potts would have my hide if I let you leave without feeding you again." Victoria laughed, conceding the point. "In that case, I accept." Supper was served in the dining room, a spacious area that made Victoria acutely aware of how modest her own home was by comparison. The table could seat 12 comfortably, though tonight it was just the two of them, with Mrs. Potts bringing in dishes of roast beef, potatoes, fresh vegetables, and warm rolls. "This is wonderful," Victoria said after her first bite. "I haven't had a meal like this since." She trailed off, remembering the last Christmas her mother was alive, when they had splurged on a proper feast. Wade seemed to understand. "Since before you were on your own." Victoria nodded, grateful he didn't press for details. "Yes. It must have been difficult managing everything by yourself after your parents passed. Victoria focused on cutting her meat. It is, but I'm managing. You're doing more than managing, Wade said quietly. Most people would have sold up and moved to town. You've held on, kept the farm going against all odds. Victoria looked up, surprised by the admiration in his voice. I couldn't leave. It's all I have left of them. Wade nodded, his expression thoughtful. I understand that better than most. After my father died, people said I should sell the ranch, that it was too much for a young man to handle alone. But this land, this life, it's in my blood. I couldn't walk away from it. For the first time, Victoria felt a true connection with Wade beyond their business arrangement. He understood what the land meant to her because he felt the same way about his own. The conversation flowed more easily after that, moving from farming to local gossip to books they had read. Wade was well read for a rancher, with opinions on everything from Shakespeare to the latest popular novels. My mother insisted I have an education, he explained when Victoria expressed surprise at his familiarity with literature. Sent me back east to school for 4 years. I came home every summer to work the ranch, but the rest of the time I was expected to expand my mind, as she put it. She sounds like a remarkable woman. Wade's expression softened with memory. She was. Died when I was 20, but she made sure I had both practical skills and book learning before she went. He refilled Victoria's water glass. What about you? You're obviously educated. Victoria smiled. My mother was a school teacher before she married my father. She taught me at home and insisted I read everything she could get her hands on. My father encouraged it too, said a sharp mind was as important on a farm as strong hands. As the evening progressed, Victoria found herself reluctant for it to end. Wade was surprisingly easy to talk to, his quiet humor and thoughtful observations drawing her out of the shell she had built around herself since her parents' deaths. When Mrs. Potts brought in apple pie for dessert, Wade insisted on serving Victoria himself, cutting a generous slice and placing it before her with a flourish. Mrs. Potts's pies are famous throughout the county, he said. Men have proposed marriage just to gain regular access to them. Victoria laughed, taking a bite of the flaky, cinnamon-scented pastry. I can see why. This is divine. Wade watched her enjoy the pie with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. There was pleasure there, certainly, but something else too, a warmth in his eyes that made her suddenly very aware of their solitude, of the intimate setting created by the oil lamps and the night pressing against the windows. I should be getting home, she said when the pie was finished, though the thought of riding back to her empty house held little appeal. It's dark, Wade objected. The road can be treacherous at night, especially after rain. He hesitated, then added, we have plenty of room. You could stay in one of the guest bedrooms and head back at first light. Victoria's immediate instinct was to refuse. Staying overnight at a bachelor's home, even one as large and well-staffed as the Double C, would certainly set tongues wagging if word got out. As if reading her thoughts, Wade added, Mrs. Potts lives in, as does Ellie's wife Sarah. Your reputation would be perfectly safe. Victoria weighed her options. The road was indeed dark, and while she knew it well enough, her horse could easily stumble in a rut or hole. And she was tired, the long day having taken more out of her than she'd realized. If you're sure it's no trouble. None at all, Wade assured her, standing. I'll have Mrs. Potts prepare a room for you. The guest room was lovely, with a 4-poster bed covered in a handmade quilt and curtains that matched the bedspread. A washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher stood in one corner, and a small writing desk in another. It was far more luxurious than Victoria's own bedroom, a fact that might have made her uncomfortable if she weren't so tired. Mrs. Potts had provided a nightgown, one of her own that was slightly too large but clean and comfortable. Victoria changed gratefully, washing her face and hands before climbing into the bed, which was so soft she nearly sank into it. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Her mind kept returning to Wade, to the respect in his eyes when she spoke about farming, to the gentle way he had insisted on her staying rather than risking the dark road, to the moment during dessert when his gaze had lingered on her face a beat too long. Victoria turned onto her side, punching the pillow into a more comfortable shape. This was precisely what she had been concerned about when she accepted Wade's proposal, that the lines between business and personal would blur, that she might start to feel things that would complicate their arrangement. Yet she couldn't deny the connection she felt with him, the ease of their conversation, the way he seemed to understand her attachment to her land without her having to explain it. It had been so long since she had spoken to anyone who truly understood her, who saw her as more than just a struggling woman farmer to be pitied or dismissed. Victoria sighed, closing her eyes firmly. She was overthinking this. Wade had been kind and respectful, nothing more. If there had been warmth in his eyes, it was merely the reflection of the lamplight or the natural result of a pleasant evening of conversation. Their relationship was professional. It had to remain so, for both their sakes. With that thought firmly in mind, Victoria finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams a confusing mix of tax notices, apple pies, and Wade's blue eyes watching her from across a sunlit field. Morning came with the sound of roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle. Victoria woke feeling refreshed despite her troubled thoughts the night before. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, promising another fine day. Mrs. Potts had left a simple cotton dress outside her door, slightly worn but clean and approximately Victoria's size. "Can't have you riding home in yesterday's dusty things," the housekeeper explained when Victoria thanked her at breakfast. "That one belonged to Wade's cousin who visited last summer. She won't miss it." Breakfast was served in the kitchen rather than the formal dining room, with Wade already seated at the table when Victoria arrived. He stood when she entered, his eyes taking in the borrowed dress before quickly returning to her face. "Good morning," he said. "I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you," Victoria replied, taking the seat he held for her. "Your guest room is most comfortable." Mrs. Potts set plates of eggs, bacon, and flapjacks before them, along with a pot of coffee and a pitcher of fresh milk. "Eat up, both of you. Busy day ahead." Wade raised an eyebrow at Victoria as Mrs. Potts bustled away. "She's been mothering me since I was born. Don't take it personally." Victoria smiled, helping herself to the food. "I don't mind. It's nice to have someone fuss over me for a change." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Wade spoke again. "I've been thinking about your suggestions for the crop fields. I'd like to start implementing them right away if you're agreeable." Victoria nodded, pleased. "The sooner the better. The soil needs time to recover before planting season. I thought we might ride out together this morning, mark the areas for the new irrigation channels." Wade paused, sipping his coffee. "Unless you need to get back to your place," Victoria considered. Hank and Jasper were presumably still working on her barn, and there wasn't much else that required her immediate attention. "I can stay a while longer, but I should check on things at home by midday." Wade nodded. "Of course. We'll make sure you're back in plenty of time." After breakfast, they rode out to the fields, spending the morning marking locations for irrigation improvements and discussing which areas should be left fallow in the coming season to restore soil nutrients. Wade had brought stakes and twine to mark the new channels, and Victoria was impressed by his thoroughness. You don't do anything by halves, do you? She commented as they completed the last section. Wade straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. No point in doing work you'll just have to redo later. My father taught me that. Victoria nodded, understanding all too well. Her own father had been the same way, insisting on doing things right the first time. As promised, Wade escorted her home by midday. They rode side by side, discussing their plans for the coming weeks. There was much to do before planting season, and they both agreed that improving the irrigation systems on both properties should be their first priority. When they reached Victoria's house, they found Hank and Jasper putting the finishing touches on the barn repairs. The structure looked better than it had in years, with a solid new roof and the north wall properly reinforced. "It looks wonderful," Victoria said, dismounting. "I can't thank you all enough." Wade waved off her thanks. "It benefits both of us to have your place in good repair. Besides, it gave Hank and Jasper a chance to show off their carpentry skills." The men grinned at that, clearly pleased with their work. "Anything else need fixing, Miss Ellery?" Hank asked. "While we're here," Victoria hesitated, not wanting to take advantage. "Well, the chicken coop could use some attention, but that can wait for another time." "We can take care of it now," Wade decided. "We've got the tools and materials, and it won't take long." He turned to Victoria. "Unless you'd prefer we come back another day." Victoria shook her head, touched by their willingness to help. "No, today is fine. Thank you." While Hank and Jasper set to work on the chicken coop, Wade helped Victoria check on her garden and small orchard. The rain had done them good, with new growth visible on many of the plants. "Your apple trees are looking healthy," Wade observed, examining one of the younger saplings. "Should have a good crop this fall." Victoria nodded, leaning down to pull a weed from around the base of the tree. "They were my mother's pride and joy. She made the best apple butter in the county." "You still make it?" Wade asked, his voice gentle. Victoria straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "I try. It's never quite as good as hers was, but I manage." She looked up at him, suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. "It's a lot of work for one person." "Maybe not just one person anymore," Wade said quietly. "Partners, remember." There was something in his tone that made Victoria's heart beat a little faster. Before she could respond, however, Hank called from the chicken coop, asking Wade's opinion on something. The moment passed, but Victoria found herself thinking about it throughout the afternoon as the work continued. By the time the men prepared to leave, the chicken coop had been repaired, the garden weeded, and several other small tasks completed that would have taken Victoria days to do on her own. "I'll be by tomorrow to start on the irrigation work for your fields," Wade said as he prepared to mount his horse. "Probably around 9, if that suits you." Victoria nodded, feeling both grateful for his help and increasingly aware of her growing dependence on him. It was exactly what she had feared when she accepted his proposal, yet she couldn't deny the practical benefits of their arrangement. "9 is fine," she said. "I'll have coffee ready." Wade's smile was warm. "I'll look forward to it." He hesitated, then added, "You know, Victoria, this is working out better than I expected. I think we make a good team." Before she could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much of her confused feelings, Wade tipped his hat to her and mounted his horse. With a final nod, he and his men rode off toward the Double C, leaving Victoria standing in her yard with the strange sensation that her life had irrevocably changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. The following weeks fell into a pattern. Wade would arrive each morning, sometimes with his men, sometimes alone. They worked together on Victoria's land, implementing the same improvements they had begun on the Double C. New irrigation channels were dug, fences repaired, soil amended with manure and other natural fertilizers to prepare for planting. In the afternoons, Victoria would often ride to the Double C to check on progress there, or to consult with Ellery about livestock matters. She began to feel as comfortable at the ranch as she did on her own farm, and the staff treated her with a respect that suggested they considered her position more permanent than she herself did. Mrs. Potts, in particular, seemed determined to take Victoria under her wing, insisting she stay for meals and sending her home with baskets of fresh bread, preserves, and occasionally a pie, for that sweet tooth of yours, as she would say with a wink toward Wade. As for Wade himself, Victoria found her initial wariness gradually replaced by genuine admiration and, increasingly, something deeper that she was reluctant to name. He was unfailingly respectful, never presuming upon their partnership or making her uncomfortable with unwanted advances. Yet there were moments, a hand offered to help her across a stream, a shared laugh over some small mishap, the way his eyes would sometimes linger on her face when he thought she wasn't looking that suggested his feelings might be evolving as well. One evening in late April, nearly a month after they had begun their partnership, Victoria invited Wade to stay for supper at her house. It wasn't the first time they had fallen into the habit of sharing meals at whichever property they happened to be working on, but tonight felt different somehow. Perhaps it was the way the setting sun cast a golden glow over everything, or the fact that they had just finished planting the last of her fields and were flush with the satisfaction of completed work. Or perhaps it was simply that Victoria had finally admitted to herself that she looked forward to seeing Wade each day, that her heart beat a little faster when he arrived each morning, that she found reasons to extend their time together whenever possible. She had prepared a simple but hearty meal: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh greens from her garden, and biscuits that Mrs. Potts had taught her to make light as air. For dessert, she had used some of her precious stored apples to make a small pie, remembering Wade's enjoyment of Mrs. Potts's baking. "This is delicious," Wade said as they ate at her small kitchen table. "You've been holding out on me, Victoria. I had no idea you were such an accomplished cook." Victoria smiled, pleased by his appreciation. "I have my moments, though I've learned a few tricks from Mrs. Potts these past weeks." "She's quite taken with you," Wade commented, helping himself to another biscuit. "Says you're the daughter she never had." Victoria felt a rush of affection for the motherly housekeeper. "She's been very kind to me." "Everyone at the Double C thinks highly of you," Wade said, his voice casual though his eyes were intent on her face. "Ellery says you have the best head for farming he's seen in years, male or female." Victoria ducked her head, both pleased and embarrassed by the praise. "I just know my own land, that's all, and I paid attention when my father taught me." "It's more than that," Wade insisted. "You have instincts for it, the way you can look at a field and know exactly what it needs, how you understand the patterns of weather and soil." He paused, setting down his fork. "Victoria, I've been meaning to talk to you about something." Something in his tone made Victoria look up sharply. "Yes." Wade seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "Our partnership has been working well these past weeks, very well, in fact." Victoria nodded, uncertain where he was going with this. "Yes, I think so too. The thing is," Wade continued, "I've been thinking about the future, about the harvest and beyond." Victoria's heart began to beat faster. Was he going to suggest extending their arrangement? Or perhaps, and the thought both thrilled and terrified her, something more permanent. "What about the future?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Wade leaned forward slightly. "I believe our properties would be more efficient if managed as a single unit permanently. The irrigation systems, the cattle herds, Even the crop rotation, everything works better when planned together. Victoria's breath caught. Are you proposing a more permanent business arrangement? Wade held her gaze, his blue eyes serious. In a manner of speaking, yes. Though not exactly business. Before he could elaborate, a pounding at the door interrupted them. Victoria jumped, startled by the sudden noise. "Victoria, are you in there?" A male voice called urgently. Wade was on his feet immediately, moving to the door with the swift grace that always surprised Victoria given his size. He opened it to reveal Jasper, his red hair wild and his face flushed with exertion. "Wade, didn't expect to find you here," Jasper panted, then seemed to gather himself. "Fire at the south pasture. Lightning strike from that storm moving in. Ellie sent me to fetch you and to warn Miss Ellery it's heading this way." Wade was already reaching for his hat. "How bad?" "Bad enough. Ellie's got the men trying to contain it, but the wind's pushing it toward the creek that separates the properties." Victoria had moved to stand beside Wade, her heart racing with fear rather than anticipation now. "My fields will stop it before it reaches them," Wade assured her, though his expression was grim. "Jasper, ride to town. Alert the sheriff, get as many men as you can to help." He turned to Victoria. "Do you have shovels, blankets, anything we can use to fight the fire?" Victoria nodded, already moving toward the door. "In the barn, I'm coming with you." Wade looked like he might object, then seemed to think better of it. "All right, but stay close to me. This kind of fire can change direction without warning." They gathered what tools they could find and set off toward the south, where an ominous orange glow was already visible against the darkening sky. As they rode, Victoria could smell the acrid scent of burning grass and wood. The scene that greeted them when they reached the edge of Wade's property was terrifying. A wall of flame moved through the dry grass of the south pasture, consuming everything in its path. Men on horseback were attempting to create fire breaks by turning over soil, while others beat at the edges of the fire with wet blankets. Ellery rode up to them, his face streaked with soot. "It's moving faster than we can contain it," he shouted over the roar of the flames. "Wind's picking up too." Wade surveyed the situation, his expression hardening into resolve. "We need to create a wider fire break. Victoria, your creek, how full is it right now?" "Fairly full after the spring rains," she replied, understanding immediately what he was thinking. "If we can direct the fire toward it." "Exactly. We'll dig a trench from here to the creek, turn up as much soil as possible to create a gap the fire can't jump." He turned to Ellery. "Get half the men on that. The rest keep working on containing the western edge. We can't let it reach the main house or barns." The next hours were a blur of smoke, heat, and desperate work. Victoria found herself digging alongside Wade and his men, her arms aching and her lungs burning from the smoke. The fire seemed alive, a malevolent force that leapt and surged, sometimes retreating, sometimes advancing with frightening speed. At one point, a sudden shift in the wind sent flames racing toward them faster than they could back away. Wade grabbed Victoria around the waist, practically throwing her onto her horse before vaulting onto his own. They galloped to safety just as fire engulfed the area where they had been standing. "Are you all right?" Wade demanded once they had reached a safe distance, his face black with soot except for the white rings around his eyes. Victoria nodded, coughing as she tried to clear her lungs. "Yes, thank you." Wade's expression was fierce in the firelight. "I shouldn't have let you come. It's too dangerous." Victoria straightened in her saddle, her fatigue momentarily forgotten in a flash of indignation. "This is my land too, Wade. I won't sit safely at home while it burns." For a moment, Wade looked like he might argue. Then his expression shifted and something like pride replaced the worry in his eyes. "You're right, I'm sorry." He glanced back at the fire. "Let's rejoin the others. I think our firebreak strategy is working." By dawn, the fire was finally contained. The creek had indeed acted as a natural barrier, and the men's efforts had prevented it from spreading to Victoria's fields or to the main buildings of the Double C. The south pasture was a blackened wasteland, and a section of forest beyond it had been damaged, but no lives had been lost, human or animal. Victoria sat on a fallen log near the creek, exhaustion making her limbs feel like lead. Her dress was ruined, her face and hands smudged with soot, and her hair had come loose from its pins to hang in tangled waves around her shoulders. She had never been so tired in her life. Wade approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee that one of the men had brewed over a small fire, a controlled one this time, carefully monitored. He handed one to Victoria and sat beside her on the log, his own fatigue evident in the slump of his shoulders. "Thank you," she murmured, gratefully accepting the hot drink. It tasted bitter and was probably half grounds, but it was hot and reviving. "You were amazing out there," Wade said after they had both taken a few sips. Most women would have fainted at the sight of that fire, let alone worked alongside the men to fight it. Victoria managed a tired smile. "I'm not most women." Wade's answering smile was warm despite his exhaustion. "No, you certainly are not." He looked out over the blackened landscape, his expression turning thoughtful. "The land will recover, you know. Fire can be devastating, but it also clears away the old, makes room for new growth. By next spring, this area will be green again, probably more fertile than before." Victoria followed his gaze, trying to see beyond the destruction to the renewal he described. "My father used to say something similar. That sometimes what looks like an ending is really just a new beginning." Wade turned to look at her, his blue eyes intense despite the redness from smoke exposure. "Before we were interrupted last night, I was trying to tell you something." Victoria's heart began to beat faster again, though she would have thought she was too tired for such reactions. "Yes. I was going to ask if you would consider a more permanent arrangement between us. Not just our lands, but—" He hesitated, then seemed to gather his courage. "Victoria, I admire you more than any woman I've ever known. Your strength, your determination, your knowledge of the land, everything about you. These past weeks, working alongside you, I've come to feel something I never expected." Victoria hardly dared breathe. "What are you saying, Wade?" He set down his coffee cup and took her free hand in his calloused palm warm against her skin. "I'm saying that I care for you, Victoria, deeply. I'm saying that I would like our partnership to extend beyond our lands to our lives." His voice was steady, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife." The words hung in the air between them, as momentous as the fire that had just swept through their lands. Victoria stared at him, her mind racing despite her exhaustion. This was what she had both hoped for, and feared: the complication of feelings, the risk of dependence, the vulnerability of caring for someone who could be taken from her, as surely as her parents had been. Yet as she looked at Wade's smoke-stained face, at the sincerity in his eyes and the strength in his hand holding hers, Victoria realized that she had already crossed that line. Somewhere in these past weeks of working together, of shared meals and laughter and now shared danger, she had come to care for him too. "Wade, she began, then faltered, uncertain how to express the tangle of emotions within her. Wade's expression softened. "You don't need to answer now. I know it's sudden and we're both exhausted. Take some time to think about it." But Victoria didn't want to wait, didn't want to retreat behind caution and fear. The fire had shown her how quickly everything could change, how precious each moment was. "Yes," she said, the word barely above a whisper. Wade's brow furrowed. "Yes, you'll think about it." Victoria shook her head, a smile spreading across her tired face. "Yes, I'll marry you." For a moment, Wade seemed frozen in disbelief. Then a joy unlike anything Victoria had ever seen transformed his features. He pulled her toward him, one hand gently cradling her face as if she were made of something infinitely precious. "Victoria," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," she replied, surprised by how certain she felt despite the suddenness of it all. "Our lands belong together. Maybe we do too." Wade's smile was radiant even through the soot that covered his face. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, tender, a promise rather than a demand. Victoria closed her eyes, leaning into him, her free hand finding his shoulder to steady herself as the world seemed to shift beneath her. When they finally parted, Wade rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her face. "I should probably court you properly before we announce anything," he said, a hint of laughter in his voice. "Take you to dinner in town, bring you flowers, ask permission from your nearest male relative." Victoria laughed softly. "I think we've moved well beyond conventional courtship, Wade. Besides, I have no relatives to ask, and you've been bringing me something better than flowers help when I needed it most." Wade straightened, his expression growing serious again. "I want you to know that your land remains yours, Victoria. This isn't about me taking over your property. It's about us building something together, something neither of us could create alone." Victoria nodded, touched by his understanding of what mattered most to her. "I know. That's why I'm saying yes." A shout from one of the men interrupted them, a reminder that they were hardly alone despite the intimate moment they had just shared. Wade stood, helping Victoria to her feet. "We should get back," he said, though his hand lingered on hers. "There's still work to be done, and we both need rest." Victoria nodded, suddenly aware again of her exhaustion and disheveled appearance. "Yes, I must look a fright." Wade's eyes moved over her soot-stained face and tangled hair with an appreciation that made her blush despite everything. "You look beautiful to me." They returned to where the men were gathering, some already beginning the long ride back to the ranch house while others prepared to remain behind to watch for any flare-ups. Ellery approached them, his shrewd eyes moving between Wade and Victoria with knowing assessment. "Everything all right?" he asked, though his expression suggested he already had his suspicions. Wade glanced at Victoria, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, giving him permission to share their news. "More than all right," Wade replied, his voice carrying enough that the nearby men turned to listen. "Miss Ellery has agreed to become Mrs. Calloway." There was a moment of surprised silence, followed by a chorus of congratulations and good-natured teasing. Victoria found herself blushing furiously as Ellery shook Wade's hand vigorously, and then, with a questioning glance at her for permission, gave her a fatherly hug. "About time," the foreman muttered in her ear before releasing her. "He's been mooning over you since the first day you rode onto the Double C." Victoria's eyes widened at this information, and she glanced at Wade, who was accepting backslaps and handshakes from his men with good-humored dignity. Had he really been interested in her from the beginning? The thought made her previous concerns about his motives seem almost comical. The ride back to her house was quiet, both of them too tired for much conversation. Wade insisted on seeing her safely home before returning to the Double C to oversee the recovery efforts. "Get some rest," he told her as they reached her porch. "I'll come by this evening if that's all right." Victoria nodded, suddenly shy now that the immediate danger had passed and the reality of their engagement was sinking in. Yes, that would be nice. Wade hesitated, then leaned down from his horse to kiss her once more, a brief touch of lips that nevertheless left her feeling warm despite her exhaustion. Until tonight, then. As Victoria watched him ride away, it occurred to her that, for the first time since receiving that tax notice, she was looking forward to the future without fear or uncertainty. Whatever challenges came their way, drought, fire, or anything else, they would face them together, their combined strength greater than either could muster alone. She touched her lips, still feeling the imprint of Wade's kiss, and smiled. Her father had been right after all. What had seemed like an ending had proved to be just a new beginning. True to his word, Wade returned that evening. Victoria had slept most of the day, waking in the late afternoon to bathe and change into a clean dress. She had just finished braiding her freshly washed hair when she heard his horse approach. He looked as tired as she felt, but had also clearly made an effort to clean up, wearing a fresh shirt and his best vest. More surprising, he carried a small bouquet of wildflowers, a bit haphazardly gathered but brightened with sprigs of greenery. "I know you said I didn't need to court you properly," he said, handing her the flowers with a smile that held just a hint of self-consciousness. "But some things are worth doing right." Victoria accepted the bouquet, touched by the gesture. "They're lovely, thank you." "Not as lovely as you," Wade replied, his eyes moving appreciatively over her clean dress and neatly braided hair. "You look much better without the soot." Victoria laughed, stepping back to let him enter. "As do you, though I must admit you cut quite a dashing figure in the firelight." Wade's eyebrow rose at her teasing tone. "Did I now? I'll have to remember that the next time I need to impress you." They shared a simple supper, both too tired for elaborate cooking or conversation. Yet there was a new ease between them, the tentative affection that had been building over the past weeks now acknowledged and free to grow. After they had eaten, Wade helped Victoria clear the dishes, working alongside her as naturally in her kitchen as they had in the fields. When the last plate was dried and put away, he took her hand, leading her to the small settee in what had once been her parents' parlor. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "It's not much, I'm afraid. I would have liked to buy you a proper ring from a jeweler, but that will have to wait until we can get to Sacramento." He opened his palm to reveal a simple gold band, worn but well polished. "This was my mother's. My father gave it to her when they married. She would have wanted you to have it." Victoria stared at the ring, deeply touched by the significance of such a gift. "Wade, are you sure? This is a family heirloom." "I'm sure," he said firmly. "You'll be family soon. Besides, my mother would have loved you, your spirit, your determination. She was a lot like you, actually." Victoria held out her hand, allowing Wade to slip the ring onto her finger. It was a little loose, but not so much that it would fall off. "It's beautiful, thank you." Wade held her hand between both of his expression serious. "There's something else we should discuss. The wedding." Victoria nodded, suddenly nervous again. "Yes, of course." "How soon would you like to marry?" Wade asked, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I'm happy to wait if you need time, but—" "I don't need time," Victoria interrupted, surprising herself with her certainty. "In fact, I was thinking we should marry before the end of May." Wade's eyebrows rose. "That's less than a month away." Victoria nodded, her practical nature asserting itself. "The planting is done, but there will be plenty of work through the summer and then the harvest. If we marry soon, we can use the slower winter months to make any changes to the houses or property arrangements." A slow smile spread across Wade's face. "Has anyone ever told you that you're a very sensible woman, Victoria Ellery?" She smiled back, relaxing a little. once or twice. Does that timing work for you? It works perfectly, Wade assured her, lifting her hand to press a kiss to her knuckles. The sooner you're my wife, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Victoria blushed at the warmth in his voice, but there was a practical concern she needed to address. There's the matter of where we'll live after we're married. Your house is certainly larger and nicer than mine, but this land has been in my family since '49. I can't simply abandon it. Wade nodded, understanding in his eyes. I wouldn't ask you to. I've been thinking about that, actually. What if we kept both houses? Mine for the main living and entertaining, since it's larger, but yours for when we need to work this side of the property. That way, neither place sits empty, and you maintain your connection to your family home. Victoria stared at him, once again struck by how thoroughly he seemed to understand her. That would be perfect. And in time, Wade continued, his voice softening, when we have children, they'll grow up knowing both places, understanding the history and importance of the land from both sides of their heritage. The mention of children brought a fresh wave of emotion. Victoria hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead, to imagine a future with children running through the fields her parents had cultivated, learning the ways of the land as she had. Yes, she whispered, her voice thick with feeling. I would like that very much. Wade must have seen the emotion in her eyes, for he leaned forward and kissed her again, this time with more assurance than before. Victoria responded, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they broke apart, Wade's eyes were darker, his breathing a little uneven. I should probably go before I forget my gentlemanly intentions, he said, his voice rough. Victoria nodded, though part of her wished he would stay. Will I see you tomorrow? Wild horses couldn't keep me away, Wade assured her, standing reluctantly. We need to check the extent of the fire damage anyway, make sure there are no hot spots still burning. He reached for his hat, then hesitated. Would you be opposed to announcing our engagement at church on Sunday? It would give everyone time to prepare for a wedding at the end of May. Victoria considered this. Sunday was only 2 days away, which didn't give much time for second thoughts, but she didn't need them. I think that would be fine, though we should warn Mrs. Potts before then. I suspect she'll want to start planning immediately. Wade laughed. She probably already is. Ellie's bound to have told her by now, and she's likely been mentally planning my wedding since I turned 20. He kissed her once more at the door, a lingering farewell that left Victoria feeling both cherished and wanting. As she watched him ride away into the darkness, she touched the gold band on her finger, still hardly believing how much her life had changed in just over a month. From the brink of losing everything to finding not just financial security, but love as well, it was more than she could have dreamed possible when she stood on the steps of the tax assessor's office that fateful day. And it had all begun with Wade's simple offer. Then we'll share mine. The announcement at church on Sunday caused exactly the stir Wade had predicted. The women of the congregation immediately surrounded Victoria, offering congratulations and barely disguised curiosity about how the romance had developed. The men clapped Wade on the back and made the usual jokes about him finally being caught. Mrs. Potts, as expected, took charge of the wedding preparations with an enthusiasm that suggested she had indeed been waiting years for this moment. She insisted that the ceremony be held at the Double C, where there was room for proper celebrating, and immediately began planning a feast that would be talked about for years to come. Nothing but the best for Wade and his bride, she declared, already making lists of necessary provisions. We'll invite everyone in the county. It'll be the social event of the season. Victoria, who had envisioned a much smaller affair, found herself swept along by Mrs. Potts's enthusiasm. Wade seemed content to let them handle the details, though he did insist on one thing. The ceremony would take place in the shade of the large oak that stood on the boundary between their properties, symbolizing the joining of their lands as well as their lives. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Between supervising the recovery from the fire, managing the newly planted fields on both properties, and preparing for the wedding, Victoria barely had time to consider the momentous change she was about to undertake. Yet in quiet moments, usually in the evenings when Wade would come to her house, or she would visit the Double C for supper, she found herself increasingly certain of her decision. Wade was everything she could want in a husband, strong yet gentle, competent yet willing to listen, respectful of her knowledge and abilities while still offering his protection and support. And though Victoria had initially been wary of the physical aspects of marriage, having little experience with men beyond the occasional chaste kiss at a social, she found herself increasingly drawn to Wade. The touch of his hand on hers, his kisses that grew more confident with each meeting, the way his eyes sometimes darkened when they lingered on her, all of it awakened feelings she had never expected to experience. The day before the wedding, Victoria stood in her bedroom, looking at the white dress laid out on her bed. It wasn't new, she had worn it for church socials before, but Mrs. Potts had helped her add some lace at the collar and cuffs to make it more bridal. "You look worried, dear," Mrs. Potts said, entering with a small box in her hands. Having second thoughts, Victoria shook her head. "No, not at all, just overwhelmed, I suppose. Everything's happening so fast." Mrs. Potts smiled knowingly. "That's often the way with love, strikes like lightning when you least expect it." She opened the box she was carrying, revealing a delicate lace veil. "This was mine from my own wedding 30 years ago. I thought you might like to wear it tomorrow." Victoria touched the fragile lace with reverent fingers. "Mrs. Potts, it's beautiful. Are you sure?" "Quite sure," the older woman assured her. "I have no daughters to pass it to, and you've become very dear to me these past weeks." She hesitated, then added, "And I hope you'll consider calling me Mary now. Mrs. Potts seems too formal for family." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes at this simple acceptance. "Thank you, Mary, for everything." Mary Potts patted her hand. "You're good for Wade, you know. He needs someone with spirit, someone who understands the land as he does. His mother would have approved." The mention of Wade's mother reminded Victoria of something she had been meaning to ask. "Wade never speaks much about his parents. I know they've passed on, but he rarely mentions them." Mary nodded, her expression turning thoughtful. "It was hard for him, losing them both relatively young. His father was a good man, stern but fair. His mother was a force of nature, educated, opinionated, completely devoted to her family and this land." She smiled slightly. "Rather like you in many ways." Victoria listened, grateful for this glimpse into the family she was joining. "How did they die?" "His mother took ill with pneumonia when Wade was 20. His father held on another 5 years, but never really recovered from losing her. Worked himself into an early grave, as they say." Mary shook her head. "Left Wade with a lot of responsibility at a young age. He's handled it well, but it's been a lonely road for him." Victoria thought about Wade, about the quiet strength he showed and the occasional shadows she sometimes glimpsed in his eyes. "Thank you for telling me. It helps to understand." Mary squeezed her hand. "Just love him, dear. That's all he needs now." The wedding day dawned clear and warm, a perfect May morning. Victoria woke early, her stomach fluttering with a mixture of excitement and nerves. She had spent her last night in her family home alone as tradition dictated, though Mary had offered to stay with her. As she dressed, Victoria found herself talking to her parents as if they were present, a habit she had developed in the lonely years after their deaths. "I think you would have liked him, Father," she said as she pinned up her hair. "He respects the land as you did, and he treats me as an equal." She smiled at her reflection, adjusting a curl. "And Mother, you would approve of his education and manners. He even reads Shakespeare." There was comfort in imagining their blessing, in believing they would be happy for her. Victoria finished her preparations, then stood before the small mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. With her hair arranged in soft curls beneath Mary's veil, her white dress brightened with touches of lace, she looked more like a bride than the practical farmer she had been for so long. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Ellery and his wife Sarah, who had offered to escort Victoria to the ceremony. "Ready, Miss Ellery," Ellery called. "Your groom's waiting, and I don't think he slept a wink last night from nerves." Victoria smiled at the thought of Wade being nervous. It was oddly comforting to know he felt the same anticipation she did. "I'm ready," she called back, gathering her small bouquet of wildflowers and garden roses. The ride to the ceremony site was short but meaningful, passing through the fields they had planted together and over the creek that had saved their lands from the fire. Victoria could see the gathering before they reached it. A surprisingly large crowd of people assembled beneath the oak tree that marked the boundary between the Ellery farm and the Double C Ranch. As they drew closer, the crowd parted, and Victoria saw Wade standing beneath the oak, dressed in a new suit with his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaven. Beside him stood the minister from the church in Yuba City, and arrayed around them were the ranch hands, neighbors, and townspeople who had come to witness their union. Ellery helped Victoria down from the wagon, offering his arm to escort her the rest of the way. "You look beautiful, Miss Ellery," he said gruffly. "Wade's a lucky man." Victoria squeezed his arm gratefully. "Thank you, Ellery, for everything." As they walked toward the oak tree, Victoria kept her eyes on Wade. His expression as he watched her approach was one of such open wonder and love that it took her breath away. All her lingering doubts, all her fears about dependence and vulnerability, melted away under the warmth of his gaze. The ceremony itself was simple and traditional. They exchanged vows beneath the spreading branches of the oak, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for all the days of their lives. Wade's voice was steady as he made his promises, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face. When he slipped the gold ring, now properly sized, onto her finger again, this time as her wedding band, his hands were gentle and sure. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Wade stepped forward, lifting Victoria's veil with careful hands. For a moment, he simply looked at her, as if memorizing her face at this moment. Then he leaned down and kissed her, a kiss that was both tender and possessive, a public declaration of their union that made the assembled crowd burst into applause and cheers. The celebration that followed was everything Mrs. Potts Mary had promised. Tables had been set up in the yard of the Double C, laden with food and drink. A platform had been constructed for dancing, and several local musicians provided lively tunes that soon had everyone joining in. Victoria found herself passed from one well-wisher to another, accepting congratulations and good-natured advice from the married women of the community. Wade was similarly occupied with the men, though Victoria noticed he kept looking for her in the crowd, his eyes finding hers across the gathering with a warmth that made her blush. As the afternoon wore on, Wade finally managed to claim his wife for a dance, taking her hand and leading her to the center of the platform. The musicians, noting the bride and groom's presence, shifted to a slower waltz. Mrs. Calloway, Wade said as he took her in his arms, testing the name with evident pleasure. Are you enjoying our wedding day? Victoria smiled up at him, still adjusting to the new name herself. Very much, Mr. Calloway, though I must admit I'm looking forward to when all these people go home. Wade's eyebrows rose at her boldness, and then he laughed, pulling her a little closer as they moved to the music. As am I, he murmured near her ear. As am I. The celebration continued into the evening, with lanterns lit as darkness fell, and the dancing growing more energetic as the younger guests took over the platform. Finally, as the night deepened, the guests began to depart, with many suggestive comments and knowing looks directed at the newlyweds. When the last wagon had departed, Wade took Victoria's hand. Ready to go home, wife, Victoria nodded, suddenly shy again despite the anticipation that had been building all day. Yes. They had decided to spend their wedding night at the Double C, which would be their primary residence going forward. Mary and the other house staff had tactfully disappeared to the bunkhouse or their own quarters, leaving the main house quiet and private. Wade led Victoria upstairs to the master bedroom, a spacious room with a large four-poster bed and windows that overlooked the ranch. Someone, Mary, no doubt, had filled a vase with fresh flowers and turned down the bed, the white linens gleaming in the lamplight. I had some of your things brought over, Wade said, gesturing to the dresser where Victoria could see her hairbrush and a few other personal items. But we can get the rest tomorrow. Victoria nodded, suddenly unsure what to do or say. The reality of their new relationship, the intimacy they would now share, made her both eager and nervous. Wade seemed to sense her uncertainty. He came to stand before her, taking both her hands in his. Victoria, he said softly, we don't have to rush anything. We have all the time in the world. Victoria looked up at him, at the patience and desire mingled in his eyes, and found her courage. I don't want to wait, she said, her voice low but steady. I want to be your wife in every way. The last of Wade's restraint seemed to dissolve at her words. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that had been held in check during their courtship. Victoria responded in kind, her arms winding around his neck as she pressed herself against him. What followed was a discovery of each other that was both tender and passionate, with Wade guiding Victoria through the unfamiliar territory of physical love with gentle patience. By the time they lay together in the aftermath, Victoria's head resting on his chest as his fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder, she felt as though they had known each other this way forever. I love you, Wade murmured into her hair, the words coming easily in the intimate darkness. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you standing outside the tax assessor's office, looking like you were ready to take on the world single-handed. Victoria smiled against his skin. I was trying very hard not to look desperate. You looked magnificent, Wade corrected her. Proud and determined, even in the face of difficulty. I knew then that you were someone special. Victoria raised herself on one elbow to look at him, her hair falling in a curtain around them. Is that why you offered to help? Because you were interested in me. Wade considered this, his hand coming up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. Partly, I suppose. I'd noticed you before at church and town socials, but seeing you in that moment of vulnerability, yet still so strong. I wanted to help, yes, but I also wanted to know you better. He smiled slightly. The partnership seemed like a way to accomplish both. Quite the strategic thinker, Victoria teased, dropping a kiss on his chest. It worked, didn't it? Wade replied, his hands moving to her waist to pull her more firmly against him. And now I have you as my wife, my partner in all things. Victoria settled against him, contentment washing over her like a warm tide. Yes, you do, for all our days. The years that followed proved the wisdom of their union. Under their joint management, both properties flourished. The irrigation improvements Victoria had suggested led to better crop yields, while Wade's expertise with livestock resulted in a cattle herd that became known throughout the state for its quality. They maintained both houses as planned, though the Double C remained their primary residence. Victoria's smaller home became a retreat during busy planting and harvest seasons, allowing them to work the eastern fields without long rides back and forth. It also served as a tangible connection to her parents' memory, a place where she could feel their presence and know they would be proud of how she had preserved their legacy. Their first child, a son they named Samuel after Victoria's father, was born a year after their marriage. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth, named for Wade's mother. Both children grew up as Wade had envisioned, learning to love and respect the land from both their parents, understanding its rhythms and requirements as naturally as they learned to walk and talk. The tax notice that had once threatened to take everything from Victoria became a family joke, framed and hung in Wade's study as a reminder of how their life together had begun. "Best money I never spent," Wade would say when guests inquired about the framed document, his arm invariably finding its way around Victoria's waist as he told the story of their unusual courtship. 10 years after their marriage, on a warm spring evening much like the one when Wade had first proposed, they sat together on the porch of the Double C, watching their children play in the yard. Samuel, at 9, was tall for his age and showing signs of his father's build and his mother's determined nature. Elizabeth, 7, had her father's blue eyes and her mother's quick mind. "Penny for your thoughts," Wade said, reaching over to take Victoria's hand. She smiled, squeezing his fingers. "I was just thinking about how different my life would have been if you hadn't offered to help that day in town." Wade raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I like to think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to be." Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder, watching as Samuel showed Elizabeth how to properly throw a ball. "Perhaps, but I'm grateful we didn't leave it to chance." Wade put his arm around her, pulling her closer against his side. "As am I, my love, as am I." And as the sun set over the land they had nurtured together, casting long shadows across the fields that stretched from horizon to horizon, Victoria knew that what had once seemed like the end of everything had been merely the beginning of something far more precious than land or property, a life built on partnership, respect, and love that would endure long after they were gone, living on in their children and the land they had cherished together.